We did it. Every time. I will celebrate the successful intro every time the successful intro happens. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, me too. Even on the asking OpenShift admin, I'm like, ooh, because I can never remember the combination. So it's always, like, is it this one, then this one? Like, I need to write it down, but I'm just too lazy.
Yeah, you guys do the full, like, the longer video plus the little, and we've just decided to just do the little intro-y.
Yeah. Yeah, ours is a minute, so I've got like at least 30 seconds to recover from whichever button I click around.
Sure.
So.
There you go. Yeah. Well, anyway, hello, GitOpsians. Happy Halloween. Oh, that reminds me. Hang on. So my husband likes to hide things on my shelf for me to find when I dust. And he said, there it is. He said he put something on my shelf, but I hadn't seen it yet. So there we go.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. That's fun. He made that one instead of buying it. Last year's Halloween appearances were these little witch ducks. I also have a monster Frankenstein duck.
Do you drive a Jeep?
I do.
Shocker with the duck.
I know, with the duck. I know. Yes, I drive a Jeep Wrangler. It is silver and it is from 2008, and I love it, and I will drive it until the wheels fall off.
Yes, and it will drive forever. They are, yeah, especially the older ones like that. They're really well made.
Yeah. No, I'm never replacing that car if I don't have to. And like, I live in California, so I have to get a new catalytic converter in it probably in the future.
Yeah.
Not there yet, fortunately, but like in the future, I probably have to get one. And it's like that'll be the thing. Like my husband's Mustang, the catalytic converter was so cheap, but we had a scare where we thought we needed a catalytic converter, but it was actually the oxygen sensors were bad. It was just that the computer gave us the wrong code. And so at that time they looked it up. It was like $6,000. I'm like, oh no. Yeah. I'm not. Well, until I'm at that point, I'm not looking again. But yeah, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens with that. But yes, I do drive a Jeep. And you know what? Actually, it's kind of a good allegory for an internal developer platform. In a way, you know what I mean? It just like it does everything I need it to do, nothing I don't need it to do, and I love the hell out of it, right? So
yeah, and it does a little bit extra that you don't even know that you need, right? Like that's kind of when we had our Jeep, that's what I think we liked about it. It's like, oh, dang, this is actually a great use for this. You know, like, oh, yeah. Okay, cool.
Oh yeah, I do all kinds of stuff with that Jeep. I've helped people move, tow hitch. I have a tow hitch. It's great. The person I bought it from was the original owner, and he used to go to Burning Man, so he tricked it out with all kinds of like Arduinos and LED lights and stuff like that. That's real fun. But yeah, so I do drive a Jeep, and so yes, hence the ducks. I've had the Jeep a while now, and the ducks are very real. There was a thing that I got introduced to well after I got the Jeep, but anyway.
Yeah.
Actual topic for today, though, we do actually have a real stream topic-ish kind of, which is that my book is live. Yay!
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm really excited. So for folks who are going to KubeCon North America, Dynatrace did order quite a few copies, and they will be giving them out at their booth. They'll be doing book signings. And my co-authors, Max and Andy, will be there, and they will be signing books. So you can collect 2 out of the 3 signatures, and then, I don't know. I go places. You'll find me eventually to get yours signed, but, you know, keep if you're interested, just kind of let me know. Oh yeah, and happy Diwali. That is such a cool holiday. I really just last year one of my coworkers posted pictures of the festival that was local to him, and it was just so gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. So that's a cool one for everybody celebrating. Thank you for the reminder. I obviously forgot. I remembered Halloween and not Diwali, so shame on me. But yeah, so platform engineering. Right. This is actually kind of an interesting topic because one of the things that has come up a lot that I before writing the book, right before joining the crew and all of us writing the book, people would ask me, what's the difference between SRE and platform engineering? And that one is so interesting because there's a certain point where you get to just a Venn diagram of like practices and processes that matter and should universally matter, right? And we talked about this a little bit. We talked about observability. Observability is something that, SREs rely on really heavily, but it's not supposed to be only like that data, that information is not supposed to be only for the SREs, right? That also needs to be consumed by the engineering team so they can understand their application performance. So, I think you end up with this Venn diagram in under the DevOps umbrella, right? But it really is like a different thing, right? And you can have a platform engineer that, they build the internal developer platform, they do the build out and everything. You could have dedicated SREs keeping that IDP alive, right? Keeping that IDP up and running and being responsible for its uptime. And challenging, the assumptions of the internal developer, like the platform team and like putting it through its paces and so forth, and actually like splitting considerations that way. Or you could just kind of have they'll all be the same team. Like there's not really a good industry standard for it. It's sort of all kind of an emerging theory situation. And so that was actually like the SRE experience and that Venn diagram is part of why I was asked to join the author career there. As we and talk about it, since there's such an interesting relationship between how we deliver products and applications and how we keep them like healthy and stable in production and performant in production, right? So that was really fun. And I think it's a fun area to explore because I think people have really different I think they have a little bit of different concepts. It ends up kind of being how your team works and what your team calls it ends up being kind of a little bit specific to the organization. I think there are industry standards, but like standards are like guidelines, and those things are always evolving and changing anyway.
They're personal, right? Like they're personal to the organization. Like Red Hat cares about stuff that Microsoft doesn't give it. Okay, I'm sorry. Almost had like real Johnny language there. Red Hat cares about things that Microsoft may not care about, and vice versa. Microsoft cares about things that Red Hat doesn't care about. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think lots of organizations have change freezes, for example, but lots of organizations don't have change freezes.
Mm-hmm.
And the reasons for doing that are going to be really particular to like who is the clientele, what scale are you operating at, and what is your tolerance for risk. And sometimes that tolerance is invented. It might be one of those things where it's like you could have, your DevOps DORA metrics show you that you have like no regressions ever, but you could still decide, you know what, we're never tolerant of the risk of releasing on a Friday. And that can be maybe a little bit more of an emotionally based decision than a data-driven decision, but there's space for that too, because it is our work, it is our job, it does impact our emotional well-being. So if releasing on a Friday, even though your organization historically doesn't have problems, it's going to leave the team with weekend-long anxiety. It's a completely reasonable thing to say, we just don't release on Fridays. Yes, our releases are boring and predictable, but also never on a Friday. It's fair. Yeah. It's fair. So anyway, the real interesting, but on that, like industry standards change, what things mean within industry changes, the fact that everything's really like up for personal interpretation. This book, when I was talking to Max and he kind of like really kicked the project off and got it started. One of his goals for it was timelessness, which is really hard to achieve in a tech book. Yeah. So I will caution that this is a very theory heavy and a little less like programming heavy, a little less. There are practical examples. Most of them are pretty lightweight though, because it's really more about patterns and things that we know work that are kind of like more holistic versus like, here is the exact way you do this exact thing. Even within observability, like there's some stuff on observability and it's very much just guidelines and some known good practices and patterns. It's not even remotely all encompassing though. So like for example, one of the things that I talked about, one of the things I talked to my co-authors about for the building out an internal developer platform is the concept of you need to have multi-tenancy, right? And for folks who work in really highly regulated industries, multi-tenancy within an IDP makes a lot, like that should be a no-brainer, right? Team A should never have any visibility into Team B's things. And so, when we were initially kind of talking about it, it was kind of like, okay, how do we want to really frame these things in the book, explain why this impacts, like accepting that as a necessity impacts, every little like thing that we're talking about, even though that's such a small like thing to say. And so it's very easy for everything to be like a small thing to say, like, this is the requirement of the IDP. This is the requirement of the IDP, right? And so why we try to make the book timeless by providing frameworks for interrogating those requirements, validating those requirements, and actually really changing the perspective of when you're building an internal developer platform, you are building a product and you have customers, right? And you need to, I don't remember how many times we said it in the book. I definitely said it in one of my chapters that where I was the primary author. Like, it's a service. Even if you're not launching a managed backstage that you're selling backstage as a service, right? You're not doing that. But I mean, you could, but anyway, not the point, right? Like, anybody can do anything, but like, you need to have that idea behind building your internal developer platform. Behind, like, the platform engineering team needs to accept that they are building a product and adopt a product mindset. So there's actually a lot in there that's about like product management best practices, right? We talked about critical user journeys. We talked about evaluating build versus buy, right? And then where maybe you would want to not necessarily buy. I kind of like umbrella that and like also adopt an open source solution, right? Mm-hmm. Does it work for you out of the box? If it doesn't work for you out of the box, does it do most of it? Can you modify it to work? Can you augment it? Can you go come back to the upstream to make it work? Like, whatever it is, right? Having those like conversations and not trying to just build everything bespoke because your engineers are capable, right? These are product decisions, right? When you're working on a project, it's really easy to be like, oh, we're just gonna go build this thing. But the project mindset is get something done and move on. And the product mindset brings in a little bit more the focus of technical debt, sustainability, life cycle. Exactly. Mm-hmm. How are people going to be using this and how is it going to be evolving? Like, actually building out a roadmap. So, and some people could reasonably say, wait a minute, every time I undertake a project, I think about all of those things. Awesome. That means you're applying a product mindset to your projects, which is the goal, right? That's the goal. So, yeah, we accepted some room for, interpretation, accepted for like, there's going to be things that are just don't apply or don't make sense in terms of like our recommendations or our examples even. Because one thing that we kind of talked about was more of like the most highly regulated cases were often kind of what we were discussing, because those are tend to be some of the most difficult to implement. But yeah, so we attacked it from the concept of, okay, this is a product, this is a service, right? There are customers, there are users, you're going to have to act on feedback, and you're going to have to enable them, right? So when you have an internal developer platform, like, one of the things that we discussed is like how important self-service is, right? Because the platform is supposed to enable the team building the product that makes the company money to do that well, and to not have to think too hard. Like, that sounds tough. Not have to think too hard, right? It's intended to, it should really reduce the cognitive load. It shouldn't add to it. So it needs to get out of the way wherever it can. And this is kind of an interesting challenge to talk about, is like, how do you have an internal developer platform which may be pretty opinionated and sometimes has to be really opinionated, because it's kind of gonna set up all the guardrails for security and compliance, really. And has to be opinionated. Like, how do you balance that with that idea of self-service and reduction of cognitive load, and kind of enabling developers and so forth. And that is such a challenge because it's a little bit counterintuitive, right? It's developers need to have a smooth and easy way of working that they can count on every single time, right? But they also need to be prevented from doing things that are undesirable or bad. And so the reason we talked about this largely from the point of Kubernetes is Kubernetes gives you a lot of that kind of like for free. I'm gonna put that in quotes. I like your smile at that. Like it's for free-ish. Kubernetes as a platform of like platforms. I hate the word platform. It's so overloaded anymore, but I don't have better words. But Kubernetes as a platform is really powerful, right? You've got a lot of like the RBAC stuff all in there. You actually have the ability to like set quotas on namespaces. This is probably stuff everybody knows, but in case you didn't, now you do. And so you can actually basically instrument all of those innate functions of Kubernetes in a way that gives you those guardrails. Like you can set up admission controllers, for example, to ensure that if certain rules exist, that those rules are being followed every time a workload is being deployed. And then you can do things like use GitOps to like, configure all of your environments to be exactly the same. So if you have a dev environment that everybody's working in, a staging environment that everybody's working on, and then a production environment that everybody's working in, like you can configure, use GitOps to make those the same, or you can also use GitOps to make those the same but different where necessary. So for example, in dev, let them have more access to things.
Yeah.
Right. In production, right? In production, at least like how we do it, SRE has the production access, right? We not every single person has gone through, in the development team has gone through the process of getting everything required and set up and so forth in order to have production access. Like that's really heavily gated, as it should be. So, we don't have the production access available to all, but we do have degrees of access that are like more highly available in development environments or staging environments, right? And so developers can be working in those as if they were production and doing what they need to do in order to basically prevent things, push that all left, prevent things from happening and going bad in production. And so that can all be kind of like baked into the IDP and baked into the formulation of the IDP. I think that it's really easy to fall into the trap of thinking of an internal developer platform as one cluster, but it's really not necessarily that. It can be several clusters. It's just like all of the pre-production stuff and also what's called, like we call it the application landing zone, like where the production environment is actually running. And that could be 5, 6, 60 clusters, actually. That can be a very big span of things.
Yeah, one thing that like when we were looking at Backstage early on, before, I don't want to say before it was Red Hat Developer Hub, but around the same time that Backstage was becoming Red Hat Developer Hub, like we were looking at some of those like just those workflows that were almost the automatic yeses, right? Like you just had to put the request in, right? Because there had to be some trail of there had to be some audit trail, right? I need to know that Jonny requested access to this group. And that he got access to this group and that gave him access to these things, right? So that way your blast radius. So like I think when you can identify those like workflows that are generally like pretty linear, right? Like pretty easy, don't necessarily need a lot of approvals. Like that's definitely something that you'd want to have in there. Something a self-service person could go in, like, hey, I need to request access to the dev cluster, and here's the project that I'm on, and then splat, you got all the things that you need, and you can do whatever. And some of the other things that like I'm actually working with a customer on right now is like they want to use an IDP, a Backstage, right, as like think of it as like a portal, right? So a user would hit the portal, a confirmed user, so like a key cloaked user would hit the portal and say, hey, I want to I need X, Y, and Z resources so I can do this, right? And what that would do is it would spin up an Argo project. It'll create a cluster via hosted control planes or Hive or some other automated fashion to deploy a cluster. They'd get to go bang away on that. It's got a timeline on it, right? So after 5 days, it's a lot like our demo platform. You got X amount of days to go do your thing. You can request more, and then it dies. But they want to get to where like an authenticated user can hit that portal and have a catalog of services that they could choose from, and then either put in the request or request a new, and then all of those workflows are automated. And so like that's, to me, that's like, yes, that's, and I agree with you 100%. That IDP at that point is a service, right? It's Backstage, it's Red Hat Developer Hub, it's a service that is now, it's a pet, right? We've given it a name, we're giving it certificates, we're taking care of it, we're updating it, all that stuff. Like it's not a throwaway resource anymore. It's something that we've got to take care of. So yeah, I agree with like where y'all stand on that. Like that's something, yeah, we have to look after.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's exactly so. It's a pet, right? But it's one of those it takes a village things, right? So the other thing we talked about with not only developer self-service, right? There's like a balance to be struck there. The developers need to be able to self-service things. They also need to have a lower cognitive load, which means like exactly what you were talking about. Automation that that can exist should exist, and then they also like need to be able to have influence and have a say. So they really like that feedback loop from the developers who have to use the IDP to the platform engineering team is so critical. And self-service can even go an additional way. Like Backstage allows this, right? The ability to write plugins, right? Or to add a plugin or write custom plugins, right? That type of thing. It's one of those things where, to be honest, if you can all agree on what the outcome is, which is this needs to be the outcome, sometimes it may be easier for a developer to just go write the plugin themselves for that outcome, as opposed to explain and document all of the requirements to a different team who may not 100% like grok what like the perfect workflow would be, or what the perfect like logic would be in order to gain that outcome for that particular user or user like persona. So it's like one person representing their entire team. So that ability for them to not just self-service the utilization, but also contribute back to it as well, and having paths in to do that is really important, because it's very collaborative thing, and it needs to be collaborative in its spirit, right? It's so easy to be like, this is my thing and this is my vision for it, and then you go and you push that out and developers hate it, they don't want to use it. Well, some people love a GUI and some people want a CLI, and it's very easy to fall into the trap of meeting one set of users where they are and not the other. And you may also even have users who are not extremely technical using your IDP as well. So that was one of the things, is like, I don't remember which of my diagrams it was. One of my diagrams actually has a little like docs persona, right? Docs as code is so much of a thing now. And so you will have these people who have the capability of making a pull request and updating their docs in GitHub or in GitLab or whatever it is, right? But actually, like, from there, where it goes, it needs to be completely hands off for them, right? And so what does that perfect workflow look like? What are the correct checkpoints in there that looks like how much should they be involved versus not? How much of the automation, like, can they even contribute to validate a docs PR? All of those types of things. And a docs PR said docs are the worst to validate, because what do you even do there? But anyway. Yeah. And because it's so arbitrary, right? But anyway, it's the point is like, so those folks may really need a GUI, right? That, when you think about like Tecton and its beautiful GUI of like seeing where the pipeline is, I, as a person who's supposedly highly technical, I love that. I like it a lot. I love a slick user interface. I'm not gonna lie, I really do. I don't need it. I'm perfectly fine to go do things with a CLI or an API or whatever. Like I'm happy, but like a really nice user interface is just nice. It can really organize the information for you in a way that's really, really helpful, and also lowers cognitive load. So, but for folks who are less technical, who still need to use the platform should be able to service like those types of people as well. It should act as a service for them. And so that's kind of that thing of like, your vision may not align to how people are working and meeting people where they are. Another example that we gave was like, if you do just kind of implement something into your IDP in a box, you need to be careful that you didn't just like needlessly put on something that there's already a solution for that the team is that it's already using well, and it already fits into their workflow, and they're already happy with. Like a really great example of this is actually Tecton again, right? Tecton does different things than GitHub workflows, right? Like, let's be very clear. But if you're developing an IDP now and your team is already really heavily using GitHub workflows, you're not necessarily going to see a ton of adoption into Tecton, right? Because why if it's not broken, don't fix it, right? So that's kind of like that was an example of like make sure that you're adding things and deprecating things as appropriate. Don't leave a feature in your IDP just because you wrote it there, like just because you put it there. You don't, if it's not getting adopted, if it's not getting used, either deprecate it, replace it. Like I like really interrogate why was this feature not successful for our team? And if it is something that needs to be successful for the team, then you have to kind of go on a user education campaign, a user enablement campaign, like help figure out where people are. So another really good example is like if you integrate like Slack webhooks to update people on the status of something, right? In my perfect like little world, I'm a developer. There's an IDP. I make a pull request and it gets merged, and I'm hands off from there, right? I don't need to touch any more buttons or do anything. But I'm also not going to keep going back to the IDP to see what's happening. I'm going to go off and start doing my next thing, right? But something that might be useful for me is like a Slack webhook that comes back and says, hey, your pull request didn't pass this mandatory check, right? And we've seen that with some like the observability alerting things that have been shown on like how convenient that is to have something like give you information, come to you with it. You don't have to go looking for it. Come to you with it. And, like be able to click into that and say, okay, what's going on? What has happened here? Mm-hmm. That's always like a really powerful thing. So, we talk about that a lot with developer self-service. It's meeting people where they are, regardless of persona or type or what type of work they're doing. Letting people do what they need to do in order to be successful within like reason. Obviously, if I want to make it possible for a developer to increase the size of their persistent volume, then that might be something that's reasonable, but there needs to be some sort of guardrails on that, like a range, like it can't go beyond this. Anyhow, so that was I was like, what are really like that's chapter 6 of the book is all about developer self-service. It's one of the ones that I hate saying that I wrote it. Basically what ended up happening is there was a bit of a divide and conquer where we each took a few chapters and like did the bulk of the writing. And then it was, fired them back and forth across each other. So it was as to one, try to have a consistent tone. I think it is a book where you can a little bit tell it is written by 3 different people. But we tried to make that as like not obvious as possible by trying to have an agreed on set of language and like almost an agreed upon style guide a little bit. So when I read it through, I felt it narrated pretty well with kind of a one voice. And so so we did that. So when I say I wrote chapter 6, like, I did the majority of the literal writing, but we all wrote chapter 6, right?
Yeah,
it's
the royal eye, right?
The royal eye. So in writing of chapter 6, like it's all about developer and self-service, and there's a bunch of other things in there. And like I think probably there shouldn't be any hot takes, I will say, like in terms of like our interpretation of platform engineering. I don't think we had any hot takes. Probably the hottest take is the one I mentioned earlier where I said, hey, your IDP needs to be multi-tenant.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, one of the reasons I gave for this is that I don't know if I've ever, I will say I have not seen it happen at Red Hat. So disclaimer there. But other than that, I don't think I've ever worked a job where production data hasn't made its way back into the dev environment. It happens so easily. Sometimes it's so unintentionally as well. And when you're working on products that have customers, Like that's bad, right? It's not good. Like their data, production data should never make it outside of those lockdown production environments. And like I said, so the asterisk to that is I have not seen this at Red Hat. So
Mhm.
like let's be very, very, very clear when I say I haven't worked a job like prior to current. And so you're just adding an additional layer of protection on that, right? If your IDP is multi-tenant and somehow one of the tenants gets production data back into it, you've reduced the surface area of your exposure significantly by ensuring that team A can't see the data for team B. Now, that said, you might be having teams that are writing, complementary pieces of software that interface with each other. And so then those pathways have to be available within the IDP, just as they would, in the developer, like pre-production side of the IDP, just as they would be in the production side of the IDP. But those are systems talking to each other versus, people directly interrogating data or storing data. So
I think the other part of it, oh, I'm sorry, my bad.
No, I was just go.
Go ahead. I'm done. I'll wait.
I was gonna say that's probably the spiciest take in there. And I don't think it's that spicy.
Yeah, that's not bad. And honestly, like when you think about like an IDP, like it doesn't make sense to only have a single user, right? Like why? The whole purpose of that platform is to enable, that self-service aspect of it, right? So it would make zero sense to have just like a single tenant, right?
Yeah.
Because even it might not be multi-tenant in like the sense of like multiple organizations, but you might have multiple teams within an organization using that thing that have different pathways for different things, and so it just it would blow my mind if I went somewhere and it was like, it was just Hilliary, and Hilliary had an IDP for everything. It's like that's a lot of work.
Yeah, and it's even like so like it's kind of the same thing. Like where you have the multi-tenants, right? And then each tenant would represent a team, and then the tenant is multi-user, right? Anybody within that tenant, there's kind of there can be an assumption of like they need to see all of the things because they're all working on the thing together, right? Like the tenant can be multi-user, but the IDP itself, it really shouldn't be. Again, if you're not working in a really highly regulated industry, or you don't even have a production environment yet, like you're so early days, right? You don't even have a production environment yet. These are things you can absolutely add in after the fact. That is one really nice thing about Kubernetes is you can always be tuning this. You can always be adjusting this. It's really easy. Write some YAML, right? Like you don't have to rebuild the whole thing from scratch to increase your security posture or to improve your security posture. Usually, I'm going to put usually. There are absolutely cases, but like Phipps. Usually.
Damn Phipps.
It's always Phipps. Right, but hopefully okay, let's be real. If your end users are going to require Phipps compliance, like you probably did that from day one. You probably did. Like it's possible that your product evolved and that's come as a surprise and then but I mean even having to rebuild a Kubernetes cluster so that everything is Phipps is like it's not the worst thing you could have to experience. It will suck, but if you are taking on that cattle, not pets things for your cluster level of stuff, hopefully it can be pretty good for you. And then there's also, we mentioned things like OC Mirror, really powerful, really nice tool. There's tools to help make this easier. GitOps as a whole makes it easier. Believe it or not, so there is a whole bunch in the book on GitOps. I didn't write it. Ironically, I didn't write that part, which is really, I thought, very fun. Andy Gabner did, and Andy Gabner also is an excellent, extremely knowledgeable person on GitOps. So, obviously, like I said, we all contributed to everything and read everything and left notes for each other on everything. So obviously, like, I reviewed it, but truthfully, like, I didn't say anything that I didn't agree with. I don't think I made any requested any changes there, because that was one of the things that I actually really liked. But when I met with Andy and I had met with Max in Paris at the beginning of the year, which is where we sat down for like 4 hours together and planned this book. That outline was like 60 pages. Yeah. Yeah. So the one thing that I think that we found when we actually met was how aligned our vision was on this topic and how similarly we all thought. And it's because, although we're coming from different places, Andy is at Dynatrace. Max is founder of a company called Liquid Reply, and his whole business is basically building IDPs, right? I build a managed OpenShift product, which is not in itself an IDP, but is like that foundational layer for IDPs. So we all had seen and experienced really similar things. So, we were very, very much aligned on what we were doing and what we were thinking and what the vision was. And I will say, like, big kudos to Max for this was his thing. He had this opportunity to do it with Pact by himself. And he was like, this will be better if I bring in more people with more perspectives. And that was amazing. So thank you to Max for that. Thank you. And so it's like, I know Max by way of Andy. So thank you to Andy for inviting me and introducing me to Max. Another little fun fact I learned today, because Max posted about the book having launched and gone live today on LinkedIn. Max and I are both dyslexic. Which is, I didn't know that he had dyslexia as well. It wasn't apparent to me. I don't even think he knew I was dyslexic. I don't think we'd ever discussed it. But I just was kind of thought that was a really cool thing that he shared. So he and I both have dyslexia, both wrote a book together.
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty cool.
Who would have thunk it, right? I mean, like,
who would have thunk
going
it?
through school, who would have thunk it?
I mean, anybody who's known me for a really long time knows that I read a ton. So I guess they might have thunk it. But, it's definitely one of those things where it's such a weird struggle, dyslexia sometimes. And people ask me, like, wait, why are you doing what you're doing if you have dyslexia? Well, why? Because it's fun and interesting. Mm-hmm. How is a little bit of a struggle every single day, I'm not going to lie. Which just is a fun thing. You'll hear me do this sometimes, even on this stream, where I'll say the right words, but I don't say them in the correct order. That like word soup thing that sometimes happens. Mm-hmm. This is a really fun thing because that can happen to me when writing or changing common letters around. Obviously really easy to have happen to me while writing. But it's really interesting when I will be sitting there and I'll be thinking a sentence in one order and I will say it in another order. I was on a meeting the other day and I mean, my coworkers are used to me, so they laughed. It took me 3 tries before I could say the sentence correctly. Every time I attempted it, all of the words were correct. The order was not. It was like by the 3rd time, I think they knew what I was trying to say. And the reason for this actually is this is a fun dyslexia fact. Words with repeating syllables can be really difficult for people with dyslexia to say. So the words enemy and anemone. The reason I can say them is because as a child, it bugged me. I couldn't. And I went and I sat down in my backyard where I was alone and I could hear myself speak out loud. And I practiced it on repeat really slowly until I could say them at speed. So now I can say, you are my enemy, you darn an enemy, right? I can do that now. It took concentrated effort. So words are hard. Words are doubly hard when you have dyslexia. And so just little neurodivergence celebration, 2 dyslexic people wrote a book. Yay, we did it.
So that's it's like the start of a joke, right?
Yeah.
So there we're in Paris. 2 dyslexics walk into a conference room. One normie, 2 dyslexics. And we wrote a book. I don't know.
I don't know the punchline of that other than,
I'm sure in enough time I could come up with something crazy.
Something. When you come up with it, just post it on LinkedIn and so we can all laugh. But yeah, so anyway, like I said, really there shouldn't be any hot takes in here. The idea behind this was to take our learnings from the industry, from years of experience, from being on the developer side of an IDP, which I've also been on and am actually actively on every day at this point, being that I work on a team that develops a managed OpenShift product, and kind of take those things. And so you'll see some things you'll be like, man, that sounds great. It does sound great. I will warn you, some of these things are more of the promised land versus this is the actual day-to-day experience. A lot of the time it's goals, it's things to achieve.
Theoretical max, right? Like
theoretical max, like what we know, what we have seen work, what we have seen be really successful. And it's difficult to find the right balances on these things, right? A lot of times an IDP project isn't staffed with a project manager, a product owner, and all of these other things that you get on a product that's like external user facing. So if you're somebody who's a CTO or SVP of Eng or anything like that, I implore you to consider doing that, because what you're saving in engineering hours, that's money, right? If I take something, this is the SRE entire like principle behind toil reduction, right? This is that like that Venn diagram circle I mentioned earlier, right? If you're taking something that is difficult or repetitive and you can automate it away, you can save hours. That is hours that your engineers can spend doing something more productive, right? If you reduce the context shifting, just the reducing the context shifting for an engineer, right? Context shifting is so painful.
Yeah.
I will say this. My whole job is context shifting, right? Because I'm leading a team and I'm so grateful I am not leading a team by myself, right? I have four peer leads in the Azure Red Hat OpenShift and several like various little like, you know, small, like there's also like functional leads who work on their direct team and everything else like that. It is such a nice thing to have, like, you know, people who show up as leaders in so many ways and so many levels within our, I think our organization structure is pretty similar across Red Hat and even across the industry. But I'm so grateful to not have to lead in a box because the amount of context shifting I would have to do if it were only me. One of my peers went on vacation for a month, and oh my God, I'm so happy he went on vacation, but holy cow. Yeah. The context shifting was so bad. So it's like, and my whole job is a lot of context shifting. I've got very little dedicated time to work on one specific thing throughout my day. So that context shifting when it's not your job, right? That is my job. It's like a big part of my job is just to make the team successful, which is why it requires context shifting. If your job should not require context shifting, if your engineers should not like could avoid context shifting, then that is such a win for everybody. It reduces burnout. Reducing burnout reduces attrition. It increases productivity, which increases job satisfaction. Like, there's just going to be so many good things that can happen about that. So I implore you to staff your IDP product as a product. You are your own, like, your company is your own customer, and you can put KPIs around it, success criteria. Obviously, you can use things like DevOps, DORA metrics, and so forth like that. But you can just use even those, like, kind of those softer metrics. Like, how do you feel about your job now that we've given you an IDP to automate things for you, right?
Mm-hmm. Like subjective metrics versus.
Yeah, subjective metrics are also important here because at the end of the day, like, you need to be delighting your customers. I've talked about this before. Like, if you set an SLO should delight. It should be measuring customer satisfaction. It should be measuring how delighted your customers are. Which is a quote from somebody in my organization. I think she's going to be okay with me name dropping. Her name's Lisa Seeley. And she gave a talk about this. And she's one of our seniors. And she's really, really, really got such a great, I learned a lot from her and from her talk on this and everything. She got such a great perspective on this. But ideally, like, you should be measuring customer satisfaction. And so if you're building something for your internal stuff, you are internal customers, like, you need to measure their satisfaction as well. So the better we can do that, the better we can take our IDPs, apply the product mindset. If you're an engineer, you're an architect building an internal developer platform, adopt that product mindset. And we gave some examples of useful product management, like product project, kind of both management tools for doing this. SLOs was, of course, mentioned. Critical user journeys is another one we called. So critical user journeys, or the golden path, kind of two ways of looking at the same thing. Although I'd say like a golden path is part of a critical user journey, if I were to kind of characterize it a little further. And if there's some professional project manager, product manager in the audience who thinks I'm completely wrong, tell me. I'm happy to be wrong because it means I learned something. Right. So do those things. Because trying to increase, I mean, we're always trying to increase efficiency, right? I forget who said it. Like a good developer is a lazy one.
I don't know who said it, but I agree.
Yeah, right. There's some. It's one of those things where it's like, where's our Hope 9? He would know who said that. That is exactly the thing he would know, right? Anyway, maybe he'll watch this later and email us and tell us because I can't remember off the top of my head. But like a good developer is a lazy one. So your IDP should enable your developers to be lazy so they can go spend their time on something that's less boring. And yeah,
it's about making the easy things easy, right?
It's making the easy things easy, right? There's plenty of hard problems. The easy things having to be repeated over and over and over again should not be the hard problem.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's winter now almost. Well, I mean, not it's fall, but that means that I need sweaters and tissues and chapstick nonstop until July because I live in the Bay Area and that's how our weather works.
Oh yeah, I live in Texas. It's basically still summer. It's like pre-summer right now, like where it was. Actually, I guess it's post-summer where it's cooled off a little bit, but it still gets to like 90. So it's hot.
I always joke I live in the land of eternal spring.
Yeah, especially in the Bay Area. Yeah.
Somebody joked that I live in the land of eternal fall, and I was like, no, because the leaves are not falling off the trees all the time. It's a nonstop thing of what's blooming seasonally changes, but there is always something blooming. There is always a ton of pollen.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm allergic to grass and pollen and flowers and everything that is nice about nature. So I'm in perpetual suffering, but I've never been anywhere where that's not true. So here we are.
Yeah. So where I live in Texas, in San Antonio, like we kind of get like all these different like blow-ins from other systems. And so like eventually, even if you don't have allergies moving here, you will have allergies.
You'll get them.
Like it will happen. It's a lot like Virginia, where Virginia's very heavy. It's got a lot of pollen in the air and stuff like that. Like you can just see it on the cars and stuff like that in the fall and spring. And yeah, I moved here completely healthy, never had an allergy issue, and then gave it a couple of years, and now every year never fails. I'm like, at some point, probably like next month, I'll be like,
yeah. You know, I've heard Ireland is like that too. I've never been to Ireland. I've heard Ireland is like that too.
Maybe, yeah, I could see it.
Yeah, there's actually a website. I need to ask my friend because my friend in Ireland is who sent me this website. He's somebody that I know because he also works at Red Hat. But I know he would be happy. Mark would be happy to say we're friends more so than coworkers because that's how we roll. But he sent me the website and it actually shows you like the relative pollen concentration in the air, like based on your location, and it works globally. So we had a fun time one time comparing like what is the pollen situation in Ireland today compared to California, and it was worse in Ireland that day. So there you go.
Wow. Yeah, part of the morning news broadcast and evening, right, is they give you like an air quality alert. Mm-hmm. So like especially when it's really windy, like the last couple of days it's been really windy because cold front has been blowing in, and yeah, it's so like the air quality is terrible. And normally my barometer is my daughter because she has terrible allergies. So like if it starts even getting like remotely bad, you just see it. So like, all right, it's about to go down.
Yeah, no, it's you can tell what time it is by whether or not my face starts itching. Like, what is that? The evening pollen bloom happens and my face starts, even if I'm inside. It's not fair. That anyway, sucks. I hope anyway, thank you for the letting me whine about my allergies moment. I'm trying to think about if there's anything else about platform engineering that I really want to share. Obviously, treat it like a product. Self-service is really important. Collaboration, I mentioned it a little bit. Collaboration with the users. This is one of those nice things where you can treat it like a product, but you also can just kind of like go talk to your users as bluntly as you want because it's not, it's not, there's not a degree of separation, right? It's not an us versus them. It's everybody's at the same company working towards the same goals and the same outcomes, right? So that's a huge benefit of being on a platform engineering team is, yeah, you're going to have probably like 5, 6 potentially different categorizations of users, and their critical user journeys, their golden paths, all that's going to be different. So there's a lot to like do, a lot to meet. You're going to have to start with the thinnest viable product first, which is like what is the thing that like what is the littlest thing that it has to do, or like thinnest viable platform, I think is what we call it in the book with MVP. you're going to need to start with that and then carefully consider what to add in and when to add it in, which means some folks are going to have to wait for their use cases to be met based off of like what allows for like the best outcome. Again, very outcome driven. When you're treating something as a product, you really need to be looking at your outcomes, right? And the outcome can't just be modernization of our tech stack. Like that's not a good enough reason to do a thing. So really interrogate those outcomes that you're looking for. Like try to set a vision, try to set where you're going. Where are you going to be short-term, midterm, long-term, all of those little project management tools and steps, really important. But you have like the really awesome privilege of, everybody working together. Everybody can talk to each other. Everybody can sit down together. And initially, like you're going to need to do more of that. I don't remember if we said it in the book. One thing that I did, one of my first like projects here at Red Hat was we needed to replace our like error and exception tracking tool. We needed to replace it. And so I went and I actually interviewed the team leads for all of the teams that were using it and found out what their most important things were. And it turned out that they pretty well all had the exact same list. There was like one outlier. And so then I had something to evaluate our selection against. And we had a couple options to evaluate against. Like, did it meet this use case? Did it meet this use case? Right. And so when I actually passed the project over to implementation, to some of the other engineers, in the like breadcrumbs of the Jira, I had the link to those user interviews for the rest of the development team to kind of review and understand. And so, for the implementation side. And so this allowed us to like, one, justify the decision that we made because we actually chose to go in a direction other than what had been picked for us. I don't remember what the initial, like, we should do this was that had come down from, or that had been identified. I don't want to say it came down because it wasn't a mandate. It was just we should probably do this from somebody who had done some research. But like, obviously, I came in after that was done and then I changed the direction. So, it justified the change of direction. And like, when I explained it to him, he was like, oh, okay, that makes perfect sense. Thanks. Thanks for letting me know. Thanks for putting this together. Right. It was a really easy justification of that. And this is actually, essentially it's an ADR. And we actually do talk about ADRs or architecture decision records in the book, because those are something that I think is really, those are things I think are really important, because it's not just enough to know what somebody did. You need to know why they did it. Why? Yeah. Right. And this is something like I'm working on a product now that's existed for several years, and I'm like not today, literally today, but in this last week, I had to go and figure out why something was done the way it was, and the archaeology in there. Like, first, I read the code, and I'm like, all right, I know what this is doing. I don't really know why this is doing this way. It works, obviously, but I'm just trying to figure out how to get away from that code base. So I'm just going, why? Why is this way? Because I need to know the why so that I can make appropriate decisions in what's coming next, so that I don't lose some critical thing in there, right? So I talked to some people, and then I go find someone who's been on the team for several years and might remember something, and she doesn't remember. And she asked me about it later. I was like, okay, yeah. So I went and I figured this whole thing out, and this is how far I got. I think we're okay to do what we're planning to do. I don't think there's going to be any residual effort. And then she goes, oh, I understand why. That's just so that the naming looks familiar to the upstream. That's the only reason. Do you know how many hours one comment would have saved me? Yeah. Just a little one-liner. Little one-liner right in there. Doesn't even need a full ADR. Just a little. Did this because this. Okay, that means it's safe to change and I can move on with my life, because that's not what is there anymore. Like that has since changed. Yeah. Or, God, there's so many, I'm, so many things like that come up when you're working on older code bases and you're trying to keep them going and keep them growing. And, some of the things that are in our code base are the way they are because Golang didn't behave differently back then. So now we have a weird mix of places where, you know, maybe generics would be appropriate, but we need to do a bunch of refactoring to get there. I'm like, so how do we balance in addressing that technical debt? So yeah, that's the other thing that's in the book. Your architecture decision record process doesn't need to be the most lengthy or heavy hitting thing. But if you're thinking about something as a product, that means that you're intending it to have longevity and a future. So you need to document your product, not just use documentation, but design documentation and why. That can be code comments, that can be one line, that can be a long justification document with user interviews. It doesn't really matter how you do it, but you do need to do that because someday you will not be there and somebody else will be doing the thing. And you want to be kind to them, or future you who forgot what you did 3 years ago, which has also been me at past jobs, we'll need to know why you did the thing because it, you know, I look at something 6 months later and I'm like, did I do that? I literally just had something come up in the last couple of weeks where I was like, whoa, I was so smart 4 months ago when I did that. Look at all these like all these notes I left for myself because I didn't even remember doing it.
Yeah, before I came to Red Hat, I was on a team, a very, very small team, that we were mandated to basically go to a Linux virtual desktop, right? Mm-hmm. And so because of that, it was top-down driven requirements. So like the leadership in our organization was like, thou shalt do a Linux VDI, and mm-hmm. it shall do the same thing that the Linux desktop is doing today. And so they didn't really give us that time to go out and have these interviews that you're talking about, like actually getting user feedback on performance and stuff like that. So we implemented it and we deployed it, and it, like, you want to talk about pushback, like there was like resistance, to say the least, right? And it probably took us more time to fix that relationship with our users because we tried to push something out that was forced on us to push out. And so like basically we got a reprieve to where we could go back and say, okay, like what are you actually going through? And we had some acceptance testing and stuff like that. So like the next iteration of the rollout that we were doing, it was much more aligned with like, okay, X, Y, and Z users were coming on this date. Here's what it's going to look like. You know, we need some of your testers. You know, here's the plan. Blah blah blah. And then that way we could get that acceptance and feedback on the apps and stuff like that. I'm assuming like when you're talking about like that user feedback, that's pretty much the same kind of like scenario, right? Like
yeah.
Like before you roll something out and say thou shalt use this thing forever and all things, like why don't you give me some input on what's important to you before I tell you what's important to you?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that this is something that I think lots of people experience that, people who are responsible for like that infrastructure and so forth, where you end up either you have a mandate or you have a you think it's the right direction and you roll it out and you're like, this is not. And I've had this happen where we roll out things to end users, like, but people we expect to pay us money, not at Red Hat, but like past jobs, and they don't like it, and they don't. Sorry, I'm gonna type something.
No, Restream UI team. Just saying.
Yes. Oh man, the Restream UI team. Gosh.
They're changing the damn thing.
Stop making it broken. I love doing this live stream, and I'm so afraid that they're going to make the Restream UI impossible for us to use. Like, they're going to just finally make it so divergent from where it was that we're going to like be like, I cannot suffer this.
Yes. Yeah. I'd rather not.
Yeah, you know, exactly. So whatever. Hopefully maybe they just stop here. Fingers crossed. Do they have a feedback email? I'll just send them a little note.
I don't know.
Anyway, we are at time. I know, Johnny, you have to get going for a team meeting. Anyway, TLDR, I wrote a book with some friends, and it turned out, I think, great, and it released today. And thank you, everybody, for your support. And read chapter 9 about choosing your technical debt. I'm going to tell Johnny to turn us off now. So choose your tech debt wisely, and we'll see you. I actually don't know when. I got to figure it out. I'll post about the schedule.